Since the strike on Beirut and since the strike in Tehran, we've had both Iran and Hezbollah promise that retaliation is coming, and they said it's going to be serious, and that they've now entered a new phase of the war, which is worrying, because as I said before, the risk of regional escalation is huge right now. Well, my name is William Christou. I'm a Beirut-based reporter. I've been covering here for the last 3 years.
والكل في حزب الله يعرفون طبيعة هذه العلاقة وعمق هذه العلاقة. أود أن أتحدث في تكملة للعناوين.
Here in Lebanon since the 8th of October, when Hezbollah first fired rockets on Israel in what it said was an act of solidarity with Hamas in Gaza, we've been fighting. We've had 10 months of back and forth fighting, sort of tit for tat strikes. Israel strikes, Hezbollah strikes, and slowly it's been heating up. Now, 2 weeks ago, there was a strike on the town of Majd al-Shams in the occupied Golan Heights, which killed 12 children and injured others. Israel blamed Hezbollah for the strike. Hezbollah denied being responsible. In retaliation, a strike was carried out in Beirut, which killed the top military commander of Hezbollah, which Fouad Shakar. He's been described as the sort of chief of staff of Hezbollah. And then quickly after, there was a strike in Tehran, killing the head of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh. Israel is widely believed to have been behind both strikes, though it hasn't claimed any responsibility. Since then, we've had both Iran and Hezbollah promising very serious retaliation, and that was about, at this point, 10 days ago. And what's been happening since is we've seen the region sort of scramble to contain what it thinks could be an inflection point for a sort of regional war between Iran and Hezbollah on one side, and all the other Iranian proxies, and Israel and its allies, namely the US and other Western powers, on the other side. So right now we're in a very tense waiting mode to see what Hezbollah and Iran are going to do. Hamas replaced the late leader Ismail Haniyeh with Yahya Sinwar. Yahya Sinwar was the leader of the group's activities in the Gaza Strip, and he's also been accused by Israel as being the man behind the October 7th attack. What we know about him is he was a refugee born in the Khan Yunis refugee camp in Gaza. His family is displaced from Ashkelon in Israel. And now it's been a few days since he was appointed as the new head of Hamas, and so the judgments aren't exactly in what his leadership will mean for the group. But what we do know is he's much closer to Iran than Haniyeh was. We also know that Ismail Haniyeh was known as the negotiator, in terms of being the one who's engaging with Western powers on the possibility of a ceasefire in Gaza right now. Sinwar is more of a military man. So whether that means we might see a more hardline approach in Hamas's negotiations for a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip remains to be seen. Israel's been trying to get Sinwar for a long time. They've been trying to find his location. They know he's somewhere in Gaza. He's been on the target list for a long time, before the October 7th attack, even. The issue is, if it's true, as it's widely believed, that Israel was behind the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, who was the negotiator and then sort of the man who could be dealt with, then it's sort of on Israel for causing a succession with Sinwar, who's seen as a little bit more hardline. And it's unlikely that Israel didn't know that Sinwar would likely succeed Haniyeh. So they probably anticipated him being the new face of Hamas and maybe incorporated that into their own approach to negotiations. But definitely, Sinwar is a target for Israel and has been. Since October 7th, the threat of regional war has been real, and what everyone has been warning, the UN, other states, that continued conflict between Hezbollah and Israel, as well as other Iranian proxies, Iranian-backed groups. In Lebanon, we've had daily strikes between the two. And when you have daily strikes, the risk of miscalculation is there. Maybe a rocket falls in the wrong place, kills the wrong people, and could spark a regional war. So that's been a risk since day one, and miscalculation has been, the biggest threat to containing this war. But now more than ever, the threat of a regional war is present. The tensions are higher than ever. And, before, where we had this idea of rules of engagement, of places that it's safe to hit, Israel can strike these targets, Hezbollah can strike these targets, Iran-backed groups in Iraq can strike these targets. That's out of the window. We don't know what the rules of engagement are. We don't know where the red lines stand for Hezbollah and Iran, and more so for Israel. Iran and Hezbollah, it seems like they need to respond to the strike in Tehran and Beirut in some way, but they need to do so in a way that doesn't trigger a full-scale war, because from what they've been saying for the last 10 months, they don't want a full-scale war with Israel. The question is, are they able to accurately judge where Israel's red lines lie? We don't know. It's a good question. Since the strike on Beirut and since the strike in Tehran, we've had both Iran and Hezbollah promise that retaliation is coming, and they said it's going to be serious, and that they've now entered a new phase of the war, which is worrying, because as I said before, the risk of regional escalation is huge right now. So the West and regional partners like Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar have been trying to contain the escalation we're seeing in the region. And so they've been working pretty furiously over the past 10 days to try to talk to Iran and through intermediaries, Hezbollah, to try to limit the response that they're going to have so that the region doesn't tip out into full-scale war. Now, from what I understand in my conversation with diplomats, those efforts, it's unclear where they are, and it seems like the West is sort of left in the dark about when the retaliation is coming and what it might look like. I think probably it would be contained to the Middle East, but that's purely speculation for my part. Obviously, the U.S. and Western powers support Israel, and they've said they'll support them militarily in the context of a regional war. But I imagine that it would mostly be contained to the Middle East. But anyone's guess. Who's to say? I think when we say the West, obviously there's constituent parts. The EU. And within that, individual states, the UK, the US. It seems, at least, I'll talk about the US since they're Israel's biggest backer. It seems that their support for Israel has been unconditional and full-throated. We've not seen any indication that weapon sales, reducing or stopping weapon sales and weapons transfers to Israel is even on the table. It's not something Biden's talked about. It's not something Kamala Harris has talked about. Nor is it something that Donald Trump has talked about. So it seems like support for Israel will continue, though of course nobody knows what the future holds. But also the U.S. Has said that in the event of a full-scale war with Hezbollah, the U.S. would support Israel. And recently we've seen I think 4,000 U.S. troops moving into the Middle East, whether to help Israel or to assist with evacuations from both Israel and Lebanon, I'm not sure. But what we do know is that the head of CENTCOM, U.S. Central Command, was in Israel on Monday to help coordinate any sort of response to an Iranian attack on the country. So the support is pretty ironclad, at least for now. There's theoretically a diplomatic solution. Diplomats, primarily U.S. mediator Amos Hochstein, has been engaged in shuttle diplomacy since October between Lebanon and Israel in order to find a deal. And then the terms of what both sides want are relatively clear. We're pretty far from achieving that diplomatic solution. But I think the first step to any sort of regional de-escalation, and this has been said by many parties, is a ceasefire in Gaza. Hezbollah has said it will stop firing on Israel once a ceasefire is achieved. Iranian-backed groups throughout the region have indicated the same. So I think everything hinges on that ceasefire deal. Now, the U.S., Egypt, Qatar have called for a regional summit to sort of as a last-ditch attempt to create a ceasefire in Gaza on August 14th and 15th. So there's a renewed push for diplomacy with a new leader of Hamas, and we'll see what happens. It's hard to say how close we are to a ceasefire deal. Diplomats know that. I don't. But so far, it's been very tough to get both Israel and Hamas to agree to the terms of a ceasefire deal. Yeah, the mood in Beirut is tense. Beirut is famous for partying through wars and having a sort of day-by-day attitude, which is true. But I think even as resilient of a city as Beirut is, worry is seeping in. Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, gave a speech on Tuesday, and he said that the gap of time between the attack on Beirut and the Hezbollah and Iranian response on Israel is part of the punishment, he said, against Israel, and that the anticipation that they're creating is part of the psychological warfare on Israel. But it is also incredibly stressful for Lebanese, who are uncertain about what the next few days will hold, who are uncertain about what an attack will look like, and who are uncertain about if their entire country is going to be plunged into war. We've seen people fleeing or making preparations to flee Beirut in terms of escalation, as well as sort of stockpiling supplies in anticipation of a siege on the country. So the mood here is a bit grim. I think people are used to instability here, but still it doesn't make it necessarily easier.